In the morning of April 14th, 1912, the beautiful and majestic Titanic was streaming across the ocean of the North Atlantic on a southern route. She was 4 days into a 7-day journey from Southampton to New York, where she was due to make berth at Pier 59. Pier 59 does indeed remain to this day, albeit in a dilapidated state. On the morning of April 14th, the passengers attended the chapel service as they floated across the sea. A lifeboat drill was scheduled to take place on the day, but for some unknown reason, the drill itself was cancelled. It is speculated that should the drill have been completed, maybe there had been a bit more order on the ship when the fatal crash happened later that day, although that is only speculation. Throughout the day, Titanic had received various warnings. These came from various different ships, including the SS Californian. These warnings and the SS Californian would have a part to play in the future events that would unfold. It has been reported, or mentioned by survivors, that some of these reports never made it to Captain Smith, and one report which did make it to the captain was allegedly taken by Bruce Ismay. Later, Captain Smith, on request, took this back. As the night loomed, more warnings were sent to the Titanic. However, it was reported that one such message from the SS Californian was thrown back at the wireless operators, telling the Californian to shut up, we are busy, before continuing to transmit messages to the mainland for passengers aboard the Titanic. The sea was calm, and as mentioned in the 1997 blockbuster by James Cameron, like a mill pond, without a breath of wind. The night sky was beautiful. There was no moon. The biggest problem that has been speculated, that because there was because it was so calm, it is quite potential that had a bit of a problem when it comes to seeing ahead, especially icebergs that could be floating in the area, and without binoculars they could not see far ahead at all. At 11:40, a loud bang on a bell rang through the night, coming from the crow's nest. The phone in the wheelhouse started to ring, picked up by Officer James Moody. On the other end, Frederick Fleet, one of the crewmen in the crow's nest, shouted the infamous words, "Iceberg, right ahead." Murdoch dashed into the wheelhouse, screaming to hard starboard and full astern on the engines. The Titanic started to move. However, it was already too late at this very moment. Due to the size of her ship, the speed that she was going at full speed, and such a small rudder that she had very little chance of turning in time. It is speculated that maybe a head-on collision may have prevented the sinking, but that is only speculation. The iceberg slams into the starboard side, and Murdoch tries to port round. At this moment, the damage has already been done. Came on to the deck, asking what had happened. He felt the shudder. Instantly ordered for Thomas Andrews to come to the bridge. Around 12 o'clock, April the 15th, 1912, Thomas Andrews had gone down to check the boilers, and by using mathematics, he discovered that a ship had 300-foot gash in the side of the starboard side. And using the maths, he then determined that the Titanic was going to founder. The captain gave the order to the wireless operators to signal for help, telling them to tell the ships that answer their coordinates for the Titanic and to come immediately. The wireless operators immediately jumped into action using CQD, come quick danger, and later on they used the new system at the time, SOS, save our souls. The captain ordered the lifeboats to be readied and the steam from the engine room to be vented. At 12:25, the lifeboats were ready. The order was then given to fill the boats from both sides. Women and children first. The port side of the ship was handled by the second officer, Charles Herbert Lightoller, who would miraculously go on to survive the sinking. He took the order rather literally, and only allowed women and children to board the lifeboats. On the starboard side, First Officer William Murdoch took the command as a little on the lateral side, allowing men into the boats, providing there was no women or children waiting to board. At 12:45, first lifeboat was safely lowered away. Although it could carry 65 people, it left with only 28 on board. The first distress rocket was then fired. In total, 8 rockets were fired throughout the night. This would be later to be confirmed by the passengers and the survivors. There was, at one point, reported to have a light on the horizon. This light was confirmed eventually as the SS Californian. The SS Californian is stopped for the night to avoid the ice and to make sure that there would be no accidents. Attempts were made to contact the Californian by the Titanic via the Marconi wireless system and a Morse code lamp. It was later found that the wireless operator on board had gone to bed though. This was all before it became compulsory for wireless operators to be on standby at 24 hours a day. It was reported later on that the Californian had seen the distress rockets. However, they did not intervene as they were unsure what the signals were intended for. 1:25, the Titanic had a sharp list to port at this moment. Although the damage was done to the starboard side, it is quite theorized that the coal, which was in the starboard bunker, had obviously been moved to the port bunker to quell the fire which had previously been burning in the bunker itself. This is, in theory, would have made the port side of the vessel rather heavier than the starboard side. At one point, the door on the port side of the deck had been opened by Second Officer Lightoller. This was in an attempt to pass extra passengers down to lifeboats that had already been lowered. The door presumably was allowed to stay open. However, it has been reported that on the ship itself at the bottom of the Atlantic, The D-deck door is in fact open. By this moment in time, the Titanic had made contact with RMS Olympic and RMS Carpathia. Both Olympic and Carpathia were now steaming full speed ahead towards the Titanic position. However, the Olympic was way too far ahead and was unable to answer her sister's call in time. On the RMS Carpathia, the order had been given to get the boats ready, to shut everything off that was not needed, and to have as much steam as possible so that the Carpathia could race through the night. However, the Carpathia's power was rather limited compared to the Titanic's speed of only 15 knots. The Carpathia itself was around 4 hours away. At 2:05 a.m, the last lifeboat had left the ship. On this lifeboat carried Bruce Ismay, who took up the final seat just as the ship was being lowered. There were now over 1,500 people, though, left on board that ship. The tail of Titanic's deck grew steeper and steeper. Collapsible A had been pulled off the deck, initially being strung up. But however, Collapsible B had been dropped off the deck and turned upside down by accident. At this time, it has been reported that the Titanic's band, made of 8 people, Theodore Ronald Brayley, Roger Marie Brioux, John Frederick Preston Clark, John Law Hume, George Andre Chris, Percy Cornelius Taylor, John Wesley Woodard, and Wallace Wally Hartley, who led the band, played their final songs. And it has been reported that the song was either Autumn or, by larger reports, Nearer Thy God to Thee. As 2:10 beckons, the last radio message was sent. And it is reported that at this moment, as the wheelhouse went under, that a sudden dip happened within the Titanic. It has been theorized that this sudden dip was caused when water has spilled over the 6th bulkhead. The list report, however, had relatively corrected itself by this moment. Moments later, the forward funnel collapses, almost destroying Collapsible A. Not that long later, the second funnel would begin its collapse, crushing people in the sea at 2:17 a.m. The final moment started. 2:17 a.m. The brave people down in the decks, in the engine room, who had kept the lights going for so long, were trapped. None of these engineers would make it off the ship. The lights start to flicker. The lights go out, And the Titanic, now at its peak stress, with its stern sticking at a 25 to 30 degree angle, splits. The stern shot down and rested in the water for a few seconds before being dragged down. The stern took its final plunge at 2:20 a.m., leaving 1,500 people in the ocean to freeze. It was reported by some of survivors that around 30 seconds after the stern had disappeared, a rumble had been heard coming from beneath the waves. It has been later theorized that this was the sound of the stern imploding from trapped air on her way to the sea floor. If anyone at this moment was still on board the vessel, trapped in a room with air, then it is highly likely that this would have been the moment when they passed away. During this time, in Lifeboat 6, commanded by Frederick Fleet, Molly Brown tried to rally the survivors aboard to turn the lifeboats around and to help the survivors. This was met though with hostility, and it has been reported that Molly threatened to throw the man in charge overboard. Back at the site of the sinking, Second Officer Charles Lightoller managed to clamber aboard the upturned collapsible A. On top of the boat was a few other people, along with the chief baker, Charles John Jugan, who was intoxicated. It has been theorized that the alcohol that he had consumed, being a bottle of whiskey, may have altered his temperature to such a degree that it saved his life. At 3:30 a.m., RMS Carpathia finally arrives on scene, and flares are fired from the ship. The survivors who were brought aboard the Carpathia, one of the survivors was a woman by the name of Violet Jessup. Violet Jessup could be seen as one of the luckiest passengers on board, or most unluckiest, but this depends on your point of view. Violet had previously been the stewardess on board HMS Olympic when she had her accident with HMS Hawk. She was then transferred to RMS Titanic and survived. Later, Violet would become a nurse and serve on HMHS Britannic, the third Olympic-class liner, sister to both Titanic and Olympic. However, Britannic would soon meet her fate, where she hit a sea mine near the Greek island of Kea in the Aegean Sea.